Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Diversifying Political Engagement installment of the 2025 calendar year. Before we get started, let me introduce you to the Executive Director of the Pastor Center, Alberto.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. We're so excited for today's event. This is part of a larger series of events we've been doing for a couple of years now called Diversifying Political Engagement. And the whole idea is to drill down into different parts of our community and examine what are the barriers that different parts of our community have with regard to being represented politically in our state and otherwise having a voice in the politics and community change processes that determine how we live and the opportunities and limitations that we have to contend with. So each of our events focuses on, for example, women in politics or the experience of African Americans or Hispanics or LGBT Americans. Today, we're focusing on students, which couldn't be more central to the mission of the Ed Pastor Center. When the Congressman Ed Pastor decided not to run for Congress anymore, he made a gift to ASU to create the center. And really his vision was that there should be a place for students that want to learn the skills, the practical skills to get involved effectively as advocates on the issues they care about and for their communities and for themselves. And so central to that is preparing students to jump in with both feet as advocates, as champions for the causes that they care most about. So we're really excited to hear from our wonderful student panel about what they are experiencing. What are the challenges that students have with political engagement and representation? And what have we learned so far about what helps, what motivates students to get involved and stay involved and to be successful? So we're very excited about that. And I'll also just kick off with the land acknowledgement that kind of centers where we're at and why we do what we do. So we take time to thoughtfully acknowledge the 23 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries, including the Salt River, Gila River, Fort McDowell, Ak-Chin, and Pasquayaqui communities that are located in the greater Phoenix area today, and whose care and keeping of these lands allows us to be here today. We acknowledge the sovereignty of these nations and seek to foster an environment of success and possibility for Native American students, faculty, staff, and community members. We are advocates for the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge systems, histories, and values in the work that we do to prepare students and community members for effective civic and political engagement. And finally, we celebrate that the role of Native tribes and communities in our state is very much a continuing one as vital partners in preserving the past while shaping the vision and future of our community for many generations to come. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alberto, for your welcome and for the reverence that you've given for the land today. I also want to give a welcome. So my name is Tiffany Thornhill. I'm the program manager here in the Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service. I'm also the campus champion for the Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassadors here at ASU. I am also a field education supervisor for Master Social Work students completing their last practicum placement before they get their official MSW. So welcome to our discussion today. Welcome to our Diversifying Political Engagement series. We are so excited to hear from our students that are passionate, who are boots to the ground, doing the work out here to advance the democracy that we live in today, to preserve it, and to ensure that it is in a good place when they are ready to take it over. So thank you for that. Thank you to our students who are here today. I'm excited for this discussion. I'm excited to hear their thoughts. And selfishly, I'm excited to hear the things that they need help with and the things that I can support them in. So I'm really, really excited for this discussion. But before we get started, in true Pastor Center Diversifying Political Engagement fashion, we want to honor the late Congressman Ed Pastor and thank him for this platform that he left for us with that gift that he made to the university, and thank him for his ancestral energy that continues to push this legacy forward, that continues to push this mission forward. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him. So we give thanks to the Congressman Ed Pastor for all that he did for Arizona and all that he continues to do today. Before we get started, we are going to read a poem to set our minds and our hearts for this discussion. Let me go ahead and read it. This poem, written by Ella Willer Wilcox, is called Will. There is no chance, no destiny, no fate can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul. Gift counts for little. Will alone is great. All things give way before it, soon or late. What obstacle can stay the mighty force of the sea-seeking river in its course, or cause the ascending orb of day to wait? Each well-born soul must win what it deserves. Let the full prate of luck. The fortunate is he whose earnest purpose never swerves, whose slightest action or inaction serves the one great aim. Why? Even death stands still and waits an hour, sometimes, for such a will. Well, thank you to Miss Ella Willer Wilcox for letting us know that will can get us through. And that is what we are asking for our students to continue to remember as they continue their journey through academia. Your will get you through. All right, so let me go ahead and introduce you to Francis. Francis is our Master Social Work student here in the Pasteur Center, and one that I get the privilege of serving as their field education supervisor. Francis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Um, yeah, I am very excited to be moderating my first webinar here. I was very fortunate to be able to be behind the scenes for last semester's webinars, and I have learned so much from all the different diversifying political engagement events. And I'm very excited to be learning from the different students that we have here. So to get us started, let's start with Katie Ritchie. Would you like to give your introduction, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Katie Ritchie. I'm a sophomore at ASU studying public policy and economics. I'm also a Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassador at the university, and I also serve as the director of government affairs and undergraduate student government here on the downtown campus. And, I'm really passionate about civic engagement and getting young people involved from as early as they can, because ultimately the future that policymakers are creating today is the one that we're going to inherit, and we want to make sure that youth are represented in those decisions.
Thank you, Katie. And Ian, would you like to go next?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ian Sherwood. I'm a sociology and political science major, senior spirit of service scholar. I'm also a proud labor activist in the state of Arizona. I've done several different things throughout my time in politics, but I'm most proud of being a former intern for the Arizona AFL-CIO and current vice chair of the United Campus Workers here. I'm very passionate about civic engagement amongst working class communities and underrepresented groups in our state, getting them in the halls of government, getting their needs met through our policymakers. That's my ultimate goal for political engagement here.
Thank you so much, Ian. And Devana, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. Hello, yat she Devana Montgomery Yinshe, Zatlan Tabahan Nishlan Sanjikane Bashichin, Torachini Dashache, Tachini Dashanale, ASU MSW PAC A Shilsta. Hello, everybody. My name is Devana. I am an MSW PAC student working on my final semester here at ASU, and I'm also interning at the Office of American Indian Projects, also here at ASU. I am I'm enrolled with the federally recognized tribe of the 22 tribes here in Arizona. I am Navajo, also known as Diné. And so along with that, I'm also a member of the American Indian Social Work Student Association here at ASU. And just honored to be invited into this space, where, as you could hear from my background, is kind of a wraparound of a civic engagement.
Thank you so much, Devana. And Evan?
Hey everyone, I'm Evan Powell. I am a senior at ASU studying mechanical engineering. I am a veteran of the Army, served 4 years, Arizona native, and I'm passionate about political engagement because I feel like there's a large group of people in our nation that feel like they're not being listened to and that they can't enact change in the areas around them. And I think that this is a way to get them meaningfully engaged in politics and show that they do have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. And Zion.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Zion Kiana. I'm a current student at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, and I'm also a current Andrew Goodman ambassador at the ASU currently. I'm also the founder of the Zexel Initiative, which is a new social initiative that I launched about a few weeks back now. So I'm super excited to be here. And I would say my biggest passion for civic engagement just comes from my want to make sure that communities of color always have a voice at the table. So happy to be here.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for those wonderful introductions. And let us get started on our Q&A. So our first question is, what are some of the biggest barriers you've faced as students trying to engage in political or civic spaces, and how have you worked to overcome them? And Devana, I'm going to toss you this question.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. So I feel like one of the biggest barriers, just growing up within the Navajo Nation, I guess you could say that political engagement, as far as the community that I was brought up in, up until the time that I left for college, often seemed distant, especially since most of, like when it comes to what's going on in the outside world, I only saw on TV or heard on the radio. There are very few people in my community also kind of directly involved in the spaces, that kind of when it comes to like civic involvement outside of what we grew up in. And so it felt, a little bit foreign, like a foreign concept at first when I first stepped out of, what I grew up and what I knew, as a child. So kind of fast forwarding a little bit, stepping into, the School of Social Work and kind of, expanding my knowledge, expanding my, the people that I engage with and work with. I feel that one of the barriers was a lack of representation as a Native American, and just kind of along with that representation, the understanding of our unique issues that we have as a minority, as a Indigenous person, as a Native American. It just kind of trickles down because there's 574 plus Native American tribes, federally recognized tribes. And so each one is unique and different. And so just being able to have that representation and understanding unique for me and the spaces that I grew up in and the spaces that I continue to involve myself in. And so the participation felt a little bit distant, but coming here, I've started to have conversations with people outside of, with different backgrounds. And so I think that was how I was able to work and overcome these barriers, is having conversations with people, who have different opinions, different ideas, and just collaborating, having that engagement, kind of wrapping around back to civic engagement. So I think as I grew older, I realized the importance of creating spaces for conversations within, my friends, my family, and the communities that I work with. I'm currently working in one of the 22 federally recognized tribes here in Arizona as a tribal social services, as a social worker. So also, doing that outside of my reservation for other Native Americans also, which has been slowly expanding into other parts of my life. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers that I faced. And when the people that grew up similar to me and have the similar situations, I think that's how we can overcome those barriers.
Am I showing on the screen? Because that's my turn to talk. Okay. Yeah, I think Ms. Devana touched on a really good point in terms of barriers that we faced, or kind of just barriers in terms of like trying to get communities to remain civically engaged. It's definitely representation, right? I know when it comes to doing this work, you can't necessarily force certain group of people to participate in this type of work, but I think it is important that we actively choose to represent diverse voices, because I know for a lot of times, especially for me and like some of my peers, one of the biggest issues I've kind of run into in terms of like getting some of my friends or like peers to become civically engaged is that they don't see themselves in that space, right? And it's kind of hard for somebody to, engage in something or kind of want to actually remain involved in something if they can't see themselves in that space. So I think one of those barriers is representation. I think, in terms of how we can overcome or address that barrier is just making sure that, as students, when we do this work, just, trying to be conscious of kind of giving the platform and space for these different voices to kind of coexist and be shown. So that way, people can see a space for them in, in terms of civic engagement. So that's just all I wanted to add.
Yeah, Evan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would love to add that one thing that I've noticed a lot when I talk to people about civic engagement is this cynicism. There's a lot of ideas. I feel like kind of like it's almost a generational thing that everything that's changed has like already happened. Like change is a thing of the past. You know, we did civil rights, we added amendments, we did all the states, we got to 50, and that was kind of it. And so I feel like there's this kind of energy in our generation that's just like there's nothing we can do. Change doesn't happen anymore. And so what I try to do is I try to like really note down like specific details of how progress is happening incrementally, not all at once, but it is happening, and show that it is happening. And I think that's done a lot to help combat that cynicism.
Thank you, Evan. Yeah, from what I was hearing from the three of you specifically is that representation is extremely important and that it can be really difficult to engage, especially our generation, due to the cynicism. And I wonder if it can be also due to the fact that we want change to happen right away instead of that incremental change that you were talking about, Evan. And I feel like that leads us into this question about how do you ensure that the advocacy efforts you participate in remain inclusive and intersectional? And Zion, I'm actually going to throw that back to you.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like one way we can make sure that in terms of the work we do it kind of accounts for all those things is kind of just meeting people where they're at. I feel like when doing this work, there isn't, how do I say it? I don't feel like there's necessarily one way, like one solution to fix all or one effort that kind of universally works for different communities. So I think in terms of trying to make sure that our advocacy is still, inclusive of all communities, is just kind of meeting people where we're at. I know for ASU in particular, one thing that a lot of my peers have talked about, specifically Black students, is that a lot of times they sometimes don't know or don't have the resources to kind of remain civically engaged or politically involved. And I think I'm not sure if issue is the right word, but I think one way we can kind of combat that is kind of, going to these spaces where these students exist, whether that's working with more, culture-based organizations, or even kind of making sure we're at events that are specifically tailored to the Black students. I think just in general, one of the main concepts is just kind of meeting people where we're at, not expecting them to come to us or seek us out, but kind of, making it accessible to everyone. So I feel like that's one of the, the key ways to do that. I had another thought too. I can't think of it now, so I'll yield to anyone else that wants to add on to that.
That was a great point, Zion. Um, I can give some anecdotes just from my experience in the labor movement. I definitely feel intersectionality is very important, especially for our goal of representing all workers. My old pet project that I do as a trade unionist is definitely internationalism. Like I'm hoping to push for more bridge building with Mexican auto workers. If I ever get to a position of power in the AFL-CIO, I would definitely be trying to do as much international outreach as I can, because a lot of these issues boomerang their ways back to the United States oftentimes. The labor exploitation that you see in many global South nations eventually makes its way back to the United States. That's why it's called the race to the bottom. Also, just here at home, I see a lot of value in historical awareness and sensitivity training within your union local. There's a lot of different people come from different backgrounds, historically marginalized backgrounds too. And I think it's important for people who are not in those communities to understand where their fellow coworkers, their union siblings are coming from on those experiences. I think it just builds a better labor movement. It builds a better society. It makes your connections with people of different backgrounds all the more deeper when you have that knowledge.
All right. I kind of want to add on to that. I feel like Zion brought up a really good point about this inclusion. I think that an organization and an advocacy group that has a very specific mission, like let's say like you wanted to like raise the salaries for teachers. I think that if you make that your only barrier to entry, just agreeing with your mission statement, you'll naturally be inclusive. The less obstacles you have to join, the more likely you are to get people to join, and the more likely you are to have a representative demographic of those around you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And something that I think we often miss too is like it's so easy oftentimes to like get your friends together because we're so passionate and we want to advocate for change. But to answer this question and the last, I feel like we often face a lot of obstacles when working within systems, especially I know during the 2024 election, talking within the Civic Engagement Coalition that we have here at ASU, there were groups of students who were unsure as to how to lead certain activities on campus, whether that was registering students to vote or, bringing guest speakers to campus, because sometimes university structures or other organizational structures don't make it super easy to do those things for everyone. And especially as young people who are so passionate, I think we need to find increased opportunities for young people to engage in on all platforms in every single type of way.
Yeah, that is a great point, Katie. Um, Especially with everything that's happened politically lately, um, it feels necessary to address uh, kind of the current state of the nation. So, with the new administration in place right now, what opportunities or challenges do you foresee for young people and students to influence policy and civic discourse? I'm going to throw this one to Ian.
Yeah. Um, I, the situation with the second Trump administration definitely is going to, I think, is going to present more barriers than it will opportunities for civic engagement. Some of the trends that we're seeing definitely are leaning towards repression of certain ideologies, certain groups, especially our undocumented friends and family. I think you're going to see maybe less young people who want to speak out on certain issues because they're fearful of the repercussions. Um, Best I can say is, you just have to keep monitoring the situation. I know several people who don't want to even talk about politics or think about politics after the results of the 2024 elections. I mean, my mom is one of those people who's just like, I'm going to watch HGTV from now on for the next 4 years. There's several people who just don't want to even follow the news anymore. And I think that's the type of apathy that's going to make, resisting some of these trends all the more difficult. Uh, yeah, no, it's gonna be a rough 4 years.
Yeah, something that really stands out to me about this question is a platform that so many young people use in our generation today, especially for receiving information, and that's TikTok. I know, like, over this past weekend, I'm sure all of us have heard from our friends the fears that were coming with the looming TikTok ban and then it actually being taken down for a day and now bringing political ties to that. I think a lot of my friends who aren't even regularly politically engaged were having conversations to me about like what does this mean, and especially like the notification directly tying the new administration to like shutting down the ban or bringing TikTok back into the app store. And so I think that'll also change, how we receive information and the types of information we receive.
Just to add on to that, the social media algorithms definitely are playing a big role in shaping political discourse. I mean, I know a lot of friends have reached out to me saying, "Hey, when did you start following Vice President Vance or First Lady Melania Trump?" And I was like, "I never followed them." The algorithms, it seems like a lot of social media companies are, trying to cozy up to who's in power right now. So there's a possibility that these algorithms are going to shape the discourse or the way young people who are predominantly on these websites think about issues and engage with these issues. And I don't know, if it wasn't already being shaped by the algorithms overtly, I feel like it's going to be even more overt in the political skew that they're going to bring us in the coming 4 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Ian and Katie bring up really good points in regards to social media. I feel like now, and I'm not sure if anyone else has seen this, but just yesterday I seen on TikTok, people were saying that the term "Free Palestine" has now been flagged for hate speech. Regardless of how you feel in regards to that situation, I just think it's crazy how much social media is going to play a role in terms of, just in terms of politics going forward. Like, with TikTok being a big one. I'm an avid X user because usually sometimes I'll hop on X just to read stuff. And even on X, I've noticed the algorithm is kind of, I'm not sure if it's being specifically tailored, but I've noticed a lot of like right-wing content being pushed on X in that platform. I mean, given that Elon Musk does own it, I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it. But I definitely think social media is going to be a big challenge or even obstacle going forward for this with this new administration coming into place, just because, I think as somebody who studies media and is currently enrolled at the Cronkite School, media is definitely a big component of what people believe and kind of the how kind of it's kind of how they form their judgments about the world. So I definitely think in terms of social media, it is going to be a challenge in terms of trying to get people to understand the impact of certain things or kind of how to think for themselves in a way. So.
Just as kind of a tangent to this question, what how do you all feel about Red Note and uh, the stories that you've heard around that, or if you uh, are specifically on there and have interacted with users? Um, uh, what what are your personal stories, and what do you think is coming of that?
Yeah, so I think Red Note, I'll take this one to start. So I think Red Note, the reaction of people moving over to Red Note, I think was just in response to just in response to like the looming TikTok ban that kind of came. I know a lot of users started this movement to kind of hop onto Red Note in response to TikTok being banned as a way to show like, okay, well, if you guys are going to ban this app on the basis that China is allegedly using it to steal our data, we're gonna hop onto this app, as a way of spite. And personally, I don't know too much about Red Note, but I do think it is kind of cool in terms of like the cultural exchange that's happening on Red Note. I'm not sure if anyone else on the panel, but I know in my personal experience, I've seen some cool cultural exchanges where Red Note users are pretty welcoming of the American user base that's coming on. So I think it's really cool in terms of seeing that cultural exchange between people. But yeah, I think a lot of that primarily is coming, out of spite of the TikTok ban, which, I think it's completely valid. People are free to feel how they want to feel. So I just think the situation's been kind of cool, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Zion. All right, and then let's see. Okay, we're good on time. Um, so what role do you think social advocacy plays in diversifying political engagement, particularly among young people in marginalized communities? I'm throwing this one to Evan.
Yeah, so I think that we kind of touched on this. I think social advocacy really does two things. It lowers the barrier of entry for people to participate and engage in politics. And like Zion brought up earlier, it provides community, it provides a reflection of yourself, the acknowledgement that, hey, people like me not only care about the same stuff as me, but they also think that it's important enough to talk about. I think that validation is important. A lot of people sit around and like, like I'm really bugged out by this, but is it really worth talking about? Is it worth bringing up? And these advocacy groups really show, yes, it is. It's important that you talk about what's true to you. I think that well, a funny anecdote is that when I was in the army, a big problem was getting out of the army. It's a complicated process, and some people end up staying in just because I don't want to deal with it. And it's kind of the same with politics. It's confusing. It's kind of like purposely obtuse and obscure. And so I feel like advocacy groups really just say like, hey, here's the roadmap. Here's what you have to do to get involved. Here's how we're doing it. And on top of that, it's a part of a cause that you already care about. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and add to that. Like I think that we all know that social advocacy plays a crucial in like diversifying political engagement. So especially for young kids, or young people, I should say, we talked about social media. That is a huge, huge part of everybody's lives, I feel like. And unfortunately, it does skew some people, or give misinformation, or, kind of manipulates them into thinking otherwise. So having, social advocacy spaces, platforms, what have you, however you can advocate, um, is very important. Having that in-person interaction and kind of being able to see where they are, like what level of understanding they're having. And if you're typing over social media, or you're texting them, or you're having other interactions with them other than like in person and face to face, I think that plays a huge role. And then it also creates awareness too, so we can gather people's ideas, have topics on specific issues that we face, and whether it's preserving in I guess like my spaces, like the native languages, fighting for environmental justice and protecting our sacred lands. And so for, I guess, like many young Navajo people, social media and digital platforms have become spaces to share those stories. And so just kind of going back to the other question, like what opportunities does it have versus challenges, So it's kind of a balance in a way. But it's really all up to like an individual person at the end of the day. And um, so having to be able to marginalize, like it's difficult to explain, because I feel like my thought process is kind of hitting topics on every area of my life. And so I think that the role that I would play is just having those in-person conversations, having that um, human to human interaction would be kind of like what would work for people that grew up and think like me, and also to see what other people who don't think and didn't grow up like me.
And those are both really great points from both Evan and Vana. You just look at the history of why we even have these advocacy organizations. It's because we're supposed to be a pluralistic society where it's all these different groups come together and try and make policy changes. But mostly for marginalized communities, we had to do this for survival. The whole reason the NAACP existed was to push for civil rights in this country post Reconstruction, because many times both political parties just kind of leave so many sections of our society out. That's what we're seeing now. We're seeing more and more people becoming independents, and I would advise people who are feeling alienated by both the Democrats and the Republicans to get more involved in issue-based organizing. Groups like Save Our Schools Arizona, working to improve our public schools and kind of push back on this austerity mentality on ESAs and defunding public education. The data is clear that this is an issue that has cross-partisan appeal. States like Kentucky and Nebraska voted down school choice by large 60% margins. Those people who are feeling alienated by the two-party system, I think definitely should consider looking into issue-based advocacy groups and, people from communities that are still marginalized. Definitely it's not hopeless. It's not a cynical zero-sum game. There are ways to make the policy changes we want to see.
I would love to add on to that, Ian. I agree. I think that social advocacy shows that meaningful political engagement can happen outside of what we traditionally think happens in the two-party system. Democrats, Republicans, that's kind of dominated our politics for a very long time. We've grown up with those. And I think social advocacy shows that there's alternate routes. You can care about something without having to care about everything that the Democrats care about, or you don't have to care about everything that Republicans care about. You can care about your things, and you can organize as a community and make that a reality. Social advocacy is how the marginalized become influential. It has to start somewhere, and it's usually grassroots. And so, yeah, I agree with that, Ian.
Thank you all so much for your contributions. That was like such a well-rounded answer from everyone on that question. I loved it. Um, and so, Devana, I'm going to be asking you this question to start with. And I know you personally from our classes and everything, and I know that you have so much on your plate. So specifically with you, balancing activism, academics, and personal well-being can be challenging on top of your full-time workload. How do you practice self-care, and how do your personal values guide your approach to political engagement?
Yeah. Honestly, sometimes I don't know. Like, I don't know how I do it. It's just, um, I think that I can say 100% just the support that I have surrounding me has really helped me with self-care. It's helped me with my academics. It's helped me with my well-being. Um, I am a first generation college student, first generation kind of everything. So I have everyone supporting me and uplifting me. My sisters live just a couple of minutes away from me. My parents live on the Navajo Nation. And so it's just like the check-ins and stuff that have helped me. I also work in an environment, of course, it's, surrounded with Native Americans. And so they grew up in similar aspects as I have. And it's just like a huge teaching to have family, whether that's blood, whether that's clan related. When I introduce myself to start off, those how I introduced myself was through my clans too. So you can meet someone, and you'll probably meet a Navajo almost everywhere you go. If not, then I would say, it'll happen at some point, especially here in Arizona, just given that, this is our homeland as well. And so I have a schedule. I have to have everything in my calendar, and everybody knows my schedule. So, just given that and open because I know I need the help, and just acknowledging that at first was a little bit difficult for me. So just being able to be honest with myself, I think that's how I can best explain how I've been able to do this. When I first started grad school, I left the employment world, and thankfully I have a partner who was willing and, more than willing to care for me, my financial needs and take care of everything at home, and, kind of just pave that way for me. And so, just my support system, and then my family, like, rooting me on even till today. Like I mentioned, I'm working full time and going to school full time. So just having the support at home, having the support at work. And then of course I meet amazing people like Francis, who I can vent to, who I can talk to and, learn things from. So I think that's how I've been able to do it. How I practice self-care is Sundays, I rot in bed. That is my I think that's kind of what's helped me get through this, because I work Monday through Thursday, and then I have classes, of course, during those times. And then Friday and Saturdays, I actually do my internships. So just having that schedule in place, and trying to, um, also, just taking time for myself, taking care of myself. Um, and then I think like one of the biggest resets is going back home to see my parents, helping them with, um, the animals, helping them with chores around the house, doing things for them. I think that, growing up the youngest, has also been a part of where I am today, is because they're like, I um, had more opportunities growing up versus my older siblings. And so that plays a role. So I try to give back to my parents, and that makes me feel really good. And so, going back to my parents' house and helping them in any way I possibly can. I actually did that last week. And so I'm feeling really great this week. And so thank you.
I will gladly go next. I think like there's a lot of things that you can do for self-care. But I think one of the things you can do is be preventative towards that stress. I think a lot of us are passionate, and it's very easy to start caring about things. but sometimes I've noticed for myself at least that caring kind of spreads a little thin. There's a lot of things going on in this world, and not all of them are great. And I think an important thing to do for yourself is to learn what impacts you now, what's impacting the area around you, and what you're working towards trying to resolve. You can only care about so much. I think it's important to pick and choose your battles. If you don't overload yourself, you're not going to get stressed out as much, in my opinion. And I don't think that's selfish to not care about everything that's wrong in the world. I think it's good to pick and choose, put your effort into a few things rather than worrying about everything.
I think the enemy of every young organizer is burnout. You know, there, like Evan said, there are so many different issues that you can care about that it's hard to really pick one battle. And when you try to fight all of these battles, you end up just completely done after a while. So I always kind of do a capacity check with myself. I'm like, can I really go out and fight for striking workers while also fighting against ESAs, while also fighting for clean water? Can I do all of three of these at the same time? No, I can't. I have to pick one. Which one has like active developments going on? Which one still needs a little bit of work? That's the type of assessment I make with myself. And, I also don't really watch that many dark TV shows. I still watch a lot of cartoons. Be honest, my cartoon intake is still in like the 6 to 12 demographic. Zion knows what I watch. A lot of regular show, a lot of Adventure Time. I gotta have the colors to kind of drown out the dark, dreary political world we're in. So, it's just kind of keeping it light when you're not thinking about politics, along with a capacity check, is kind of my routine.
Yeah, I think Ian touches on some really good things. I think I'm very much similar to Ian in that aspect where I do consume a lot of like childish content. Like I'm probably a 12-year-old mentally, but that's a conversation for another time. But I think one big way to practice self-care, especially being a student and being engaged in a lot of things, is kind of just having some untouchable time or time that you keep to yourself. I don't know the exact term, but essentially what I do for myself is on weekends, I block out about like a 1 to 3 hour block for myself, which is kind of like what I could call untouchable time, which is like that's time for myself. That's time for me to like, play a video game I've been meaning to play, read a book that I've been wanting to read, or even like just sleep. I feel like kind of having that kind of, I guess, not barrier, can't think of the word boundary. There we go. Having that boundary for yourself where you kind of have that time where you kind of just disassociate and give yourself some time to think. I think that's always important. Kind of like Evan talked about, when you care about stuff so much, a lot of times you can tend to overlook your own needs. And I think, or one thing my mom has always taught me is that yes, you can care and want to do better for others, but if you're not straight mentally, you're not taking care of yourself mentally, the help that you try to give is probably not going to be adequate enough because you can't really help other people if you're yourself not good. So I think just kind of having that undisclosed or untouchable time for yourself is always a good way to kind of help. And in terms of like my personal values, I think one thing that I always try to remind myself when doing work is kind of we're all human at the end of the day, regardless of if, regardless of if like you're from, I don't know, like Panama or something, or and I'm from Arizona, like I always think we're people at the end of the day. So one thing that I always try to do in this work is always be open and willing to have conversations. Even if somebody may not personally agree with what I believe, or I may not agree with their belief, I feel like, one thing I always try to keep at the center of my work is conversating, even when talking to people who aren't always aware about certain topics, I try to not talk down to them or kind of like come from a place of trying to like, oh, well, you don't know, you're ignorant about this. Let me inform you. It comes more from a place like, okay, well, you don't know about this. We'll have you considered XYZ. So I think that's kind of something I always try to keep at the center of my work, is just always having a conversation. So that's my spiel.
Just want to echo what everyone said earlier about being able to take care of yourself and finding time. I think something that's so hard about this line of work, and especially being so young, is that the issues feel so personal. Like, someone that it directly impacts, whether that's your brother, your sister, your parents, or a good friend, or even a neighbor. We know that these issues are directly impacting the people around us. And so it's really hard to separate our core values from those issues. And so when it gets overwhelming, that's something I definitely need to reflect on and really just stay optimistic and know that everything's going to be okay. And on top of that, like, again, taking time, like Zion mentioned, like blocking time off where like you're not reading the news, you're not checking your emails, you really can just take care of yourself and reflect and understand that like you're doing things for the right reasons, or else you can just get burnt out so fast.
Yeah, thank you for all of that. The key takeaways that I took from everyone is just having a great support network, doing preventative checks, like taking care of your mental health before it gets too bad, um, doing capacity checks, making sure that you can do things before you actually try to do them, and getting that untouchable time, those putting those boundaries so that you actually take time for yourself to take care of yourself. Thank you for those great ideas, those great, honestly, I hope that our audience takes those to heart because it is something that is very difficult for young activists. And then moving on to our final question, Katie, I'm going to be throwing this back to you. What do you think educators, policymakers, and community leaders should consider when supporting students who are passionate about civic engagement and social advocacy?
Yeah, I think this question is so important, especially for young people. And something I noticed about this question is that it directly addresses the student voice and what role we play in this work. And I think oftentimes students are presented an opportunity to make change within a system directly, but it's not necessarily to the extent they want that change to be. And so for me personally, I got involved in this work when I was really young, around like 13, 14, because someone gave me a platform or an avenue to get in and to meet with people who hold power and to learn about these issues firsthand and who they were impacting. And that's what I try to do every day with the young people I meet, especially those in high school who are just learning about their passions. And so I urge, people that are involved in civic engagement, whether they're leading advocacy organizations or lawmakers making change themselves, is thinking about how these issues will directly impact youth and students, and finding ways that you can meaningfully tie them into the conversation, and also giving them hands-on projects and hands-on ways and opportunities to get involved, because you'll find that young people, especially at like 13 to 18, 17, have such incredibly cool and new ideas that you wouldn't have even thought of before. And especially now, like now that I'm in college, I feel like I wish I could just ask like my 16-year-old self, what crazy idea would you come up with to address this challenge? Because it's probably, better than anything I could currently think of.
Okay, so I feel like for me, educators, policymakers, community leaders must, and going back to the recognition, like must recognize that students, especially in marginalized backgrounds like Native American kids, we all have our unique perspectives and experiences that should be valued. They need to create spaces for us to share our stories, our concerns, and ensure that we have the resources, whether it's a phone number, a mentor, access to education, or funding, when we're talking about education, especially in these spaces, and opportunities for us to be practice these skills, to engage in leadership roles, creating environments where it's safe for everybody, open dialogue on specific topics, and just encouraging critical thinking. I think that a lot of spaces can be empowered, by youth's voices and connecting them and listening to them. I know that in, I guess like in a home setting, people always say like, listen to your elders, listen to your adults. But sometimes we need to kind of mirror that back to the youth, back to the younger people, and, listen to them because they're the ones that are most engaged, because they're either at schools, they have their friends who are connected to many different families and social areas. And so just being able to broaden the networks and advocate for those vital steps toward building long-term civic engagement and practicing those things at home, whether you're in kindergarten or whether you're still in school as an adult. Thank you.
I'd love to add on to that by kind of emphasizing that independence and critical thinking that Ivana was talking about. I think it's important for the leaders, the educators, the people that are in charge now, to tell students that to have some independence on this. I don't think that the two parties are institutions to be placated, to beg for change through. I think they need to be treated as institutions that adapt to us. The power comes from the people and whatnot. And so I think it's important for that independence to arise, this nonpartisanship, this focus on single issues. If you're fighting for teacher salaries, it's not about finding, trying to fit your policy into where it works with the Democrats or the Republicans. It's about saying, this is what we need. And either of you can choose to help us with that, but like, this is where we stand. And so I think that kind of determination, that grit, is something that needs to be passed on by those who are currently leading.
All right, thank you, Evan. Thank you, Devana. And so for the final question before we get to the audience Q&A, would anyone like to share a success story from their involvement in civic engagement that has inspired you or others in your community?
I'll go. So recently I attended the legislative day that was kind of specific to Native American communities. It was actually last week on Wednesday. The day before that, so like I mentioned, going back to like my support system, I was sharing with my family about that because it'd be the first time since third grade that I've been there. And so my mom actually went to one that was within the Navajo Nation in Tuba City, Arizona the day before. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool because it's not very common that she attends things like that. But I think like me opening that conversation opened her willingness to go out there, and spend the day out there. And so when I attended the legislative day last week, my family was interested, like, what goes on there? Like, what happened? How can anybody just go? It's because like we're not like growing up, we didn't have that head start to be like, I can't remember who mentioned it, but being able to put ourselves in those spaces. And so by me doing that, sharing with my family, like anyone can come, like, um, they do this all the time. You have to apply yourself and, have everyone has those questions, but being able to have the courage and ability to, talk in these spaces and ask questions in these spaces and show up. I know someone else mentioned that too, just showing up and keeping yourself involved in community and civic engagement. You have to, you can't just kind of push it aside because, you have your issues, then you're asking your whys and you're questioning people. But you really do need to show up. I think that's the most important thing that a success story for me just recently. So, yeah.
So I recently, this year, became the facilitator for the Civic Engagement Coalition at ASU. And it was kind of my first step into civic engagement in general. And just a really cool thing that has happened throughout this time is that I've been able to meet some lovely people. And what's really inspiring is the fact that there are so many people that do care, despite all the cynicism, despite all this apathy. There's still people that are like, hey, no, this is something worth fighting for. This is something worth doing. And I mean, that's success right there, as long as the dream doesn't die, right? It's still alive. So I just want to say that is some big success, is that there's still people out here doing the hard work to get things done. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, mine is very similar to yours, Evan. And a lot of the political projects I've been involved in, unfortunately, we never got the result we desired. Like my first time that I really got involved civically was a call campaign for the PRO Act, pro-union legislation federally that was on the table in 2021. I was making calls to various West Virginia coal miners, actually, United Mine Workers, to get them to call Senator Joe Manchin to co-sponsor the PRO Act. I had several really good conversations over the phone with a lot of these people who are either retired UMWA members or current UMWA members, and we even got to listen in on their call to Manchin, and in the end, he did co-sponsor the bill. Believe it or not, it was actually Senator Kelly and Senator Sinema, along with Senator Warner from Virginia, that ended up killing it. But we didn't let the dream die there. I was disappointed by the end result, but I ended up still fighting for labor reform on the state and local level. Mostly, I want to say is that whenever every time you encounter a roadblock in political advocacy, you just kind of have to find a way around it, find another route to that goal. And that's what I do every time I encounter one of those roadblocks, especially now. The party that's more amenable to labor reform is no longer in government. It's definitely the party that's more hostile to it. But I think there are still things that can happen on the state and local level that are going to be positive. I look forward to just keep fighting and not let the dream die, like Evan said. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful story. So mine, I would say the success I'm going to share is kind of on the smaller scale, but I still think it's a victory nonetheless. So I have this friend, right? And since high school, I've known them since high school. Since high school, they've kind of always been the type to, not necessarily care about politics or kind of care about social issues, which is okay. Kind of everyone has their time and something I believe. So I've always kind of just let them be. With me being in the Andrew Goodman Foundation, joining about last year, I've shared a couple of our events that we've done on social media. And, this friend happens to follow me on social media. So a lot of times when I reshare like certain events we've been at or even share like certain statistics or stuff on my Instagram story, they'll see the stuff or they'll see like my Instagram story or whatever, but I didn't think too much of it. And this year, with it being an election year, we were doing a lot of tabling events. So Andrew Goodman actually had the chance to be one of the facilitators of the Delta Sigma Theta chapters. So the Delta Sigma Theta chapter here at Arizona State did an entire civic engagement event here in the Walter Cronkite School. Andrew Goodman had the pleasure of being some facilitators to facilitate discussion around voting and the importance of voting. And he was there at the event. He wasn't there for long, but he still seen me. And then he also happened to see me at a couple other tabling events. So Andrew Goodman also was a part of USG Downtown's vice president. They hosted a vice president. They basically hosted a watch party for the vice president debate. And he showed his face for a little bit. And long story short, after like kind of like running into me at these events and kind of just talking for a little bit, he actually voted for the first time in this past election, which, it's not the biggest victory, but as someone who's known him since high school, to kind of see him kind of see his evolution of really not caring about politics or kind of not participating, and then to kind of kind of just talk with him briefly at these events and kind of see him kind of wake up or necessarily start to realize what's going on. It was kind of a small victory for me personally to kind of see like, okay, I was able to get somebody I cared about to actually vote. So yeah, that was a victory that I would say that I've had recently. So
Katie, did you want to add something?
Yes, sorry. Those are all very cool stories. I think for me, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but my, civic voice was really shaped when I was in high school and the opportunities that were provided for me then to serve, with city leaders at the state and federal level, and more specifically through the platform of youth commissions. And I think those often, go overlooked today. And so when I was on the Governor's Youth Commission in high school, we had the opportunity to work with schools from across the state to work to increase, FAFSA completion rates and really expose students to alternatives to traditional higher education. Like what would it look like to go to vocational programs and other forms of post-secondary education. And that really, allowed me to understand what was really going on across the state. I think oftentimes we're really confined to the voices and perspectives within our own neighborhood and our zip codes. And so that really challenged me to think about all of the stakeholders across this state. And so now I have the opportunity to help advise the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council for the city of Tempe and provide that platform for so many young people within the city today who are in high school, who I can really see myself through as someone who is just in their shoes. And as they, create change, it's really fun to hear their perspectives and to hear their ideas, but also provide some resources and guidance and understand and teach them, this is a great idea, but how can we invite more people into this conversation? And I'm seeing our future leaders, in those conversations, and people that are really going to continue to build that pipeline for civic leaders to come. And so that's probably my proudest achievement.
Well, thank you, everyone. So that concludes our moderator questions, and we will be moving on to our audience Q&A. And looks like I will be passing that over to Tiffany.
Really? Me? I didn't think I was going to be doing this part, but sure, I'll do it. All right, so we have a couple questions from our audience. First of all, wonderful, wonderful discussion, y'all. I was fully engaged the entire time sitting here behind the scenes doing all the little tech stuff. Sorry, y'all, for a little bit of those mishaps. But I'm very proud of all of you, and I've just learned so much sitting here from you and what you all are passionate about and what you care about going forward, right? What's important to you and your generation, and how do we, in the generation before y'all, I'm not that much older, how do we leave this place for you, and how do we support you in a way that feels good for you, right? In a way that doesn't feel like we're just pushing off the problems onto you and setting them aside. I know, this isn't about me, but from my generation, I feel that as well, right? The boomers and they'll just deal with it. That's not our problem. They'll handle it for us, and I don't think those words have ever been spoken, but that's how it feels as a Zennial. From that generation above me. So I understand where you guys are coming from. So thank you so much for your honest, authentic, genuine thoughts here. And I'm excited for you to answer these questions that our audience members have put in the chat. So those of you who are in the audience, if you have more questions, please feel free to add them. So our first question says, right-wing conservative civic engagement is arguably at its peak and has clearly been shown to be effective. During the election, Turning Point USA, even events had far more draw than, say, those put on by Harris Walls. What conversations are you all having internally on how to energize young adults who are moderate or open to leftist dialogues and messaging? So it looks like Katie wants to jump on that one first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely think during the 2024 election, especially because we all go to ASU, we saw directly on campus the impact that ASU students have in these elections and how campaigns were directly targeting our campus and our students. And we definitely saw, at least I did, like walking through campus in November, saw events hosted by Turning Point USA, and we saw movements through, I know something that really stood out to me was like fraternities for Trump and seeing fraternities and Greek life endorsing political candidates. But I'd also argue that that happened on the other side too. So many students were involved in that work. And getting engaged in, Vice President Harris's campaign as well. And I think what we are all trying to do as civic leaders at ASU is find spaces for that middle ground where we can have those discussions from both sides of the aisle and bring those perspectives together. I think that's specifically what ASU Civic Engagement Coalition hopes to do, is to bring all types of advocacy organizations together with the core mission of increasing voter turnout regardless of political ideology. And I think from there, we can have healthier discussions about the key issues that are directly impacting students. And I think ultimately, as an institution, that's what ASU is seeking to do, especially with new centers like the ASU Free Speech Center and what's going to come when we have more discussions like that.
Yeah, I was peeking at that question earlier. I've been wanting to answer this one. That one has a lot of setup. this is just my analysis of the 2024 election. The right-wing groups will always have more money and more institutional sway than anything that's like left of center. And that's because, you know, just generally speaking, their ideology conforms more around the status quo. It's more status quo friendly. There is a specific day I knew the election was lost for the Harris-Walz campaign, and it was October 18th. It was when Charlie Kirk came to campus and he had that huge TPUSA turnout. I was like, it's over. It's Jover. But you know, the reason why I feel is because it's kind of superficial engagement, the way the way that both campaigns kind of engage with students. It's very personality driven. Like I don't know for sure how many people who were at that TPUSA thing were there for more like policy reasons over maybe the personality of Charlie Kirk or Carrie Lake or Donald Trump. And I do feel like it was that way too on Harris-Walz's side too. Like they were throwing every celebrity that they could find to come to ASU. They had Ted Danson there one day. I was like, who is this for? They had America Ferrera. They had Jessica Alba. It was very personality driven and not really policy driven. I think we grossly underestimate the average voter, the average student by saying they don't really care about the individual policies. They care about the personalities. I think it's the other way around. I think there's several more people than that's generally thought of that care about you know, the quality of our water, the prices of our grocery store items, you know, our direction as a country on the international stage, healthcare. I think there's a lot more people out there who want to hear more substantive engagement. And that's kind of the discussions we've been having is we're going to focus more on issue-based campaigns and the various groups I'm in, getting as many people deep, you know, outside of the political, you know, partisan issues, just nonpartisan issue-based organizing, I think is the future for engagement.
I would love to take this question in a slightly different direction. I would actually genuinely ask, do we think that high energy voting or participation in events is the same as civic engagement? Should the goal be to energize young adults? Is that what we're trying to do? Or are we trying to breed this kind of civic engagement and focus on policy? I understand that there's this kind of like, oh, you know, just like the Democrats just can't figure out how to energize their voter base. And I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal should be not to energize and get elected, but to enact appropriate policy that makes people's lives better, at least listens to the people. And unless that happens, people aren't going to participate. So I don't think the simple goal is just like, you know, get more people at the rallies and show everyone that we're having a great time. I think that's kind of a distraction. I don't think we should be focusing on excitement. I think we should be focusing on just on doing the right thing. And I know that kind of like you have to get elected, blah, 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 and you have to have a voter base and stuff like that. But I would just kind of throw that out there that maybe that shouldn't be our goal, and maybe we shouldn't label it as that.
That was a great answer, Evan. I wanted to respond. I agree with you. I think it's more about the quality of the civic engagement you're offering people than the excitement, the spectacle, the horse show of politics. You know, the last 2 or 3 years, I've completely left that side of myself behind because I realize it's kind of a dead end. I think it's once people see you out there advocating for the meaningful policies, I think that's the cycle that's going to lead to more people wanting to vote, wanting to, you know, engage more during those elections. I don't think you have to just solely focus on the turnout game. I think that you got to encourage people to think about politics outside of the election years and get them more involved in the actual governing process than, you know, just the horse and pony show of the election. So that was a great point on your part, Evan.
Yeah, I would just add, you know, from a mentor and advisor standpoint, is that we have here in the Pasteur Center for Politics and Public Service several engagement experiences that are nonpartisan and very partisan inclusive, right? So we invite all conversation, all ideologies to the table. The problem that we're seeing is that we are not getting the moderate conservative voice to show up to the discussions. And so, I think that, to Evan's point and to Ian's point, is it all about energizing all the time? Or is it really about discussing the issues at hand and addressing them from a diverse standpoint, right? Diverse in ideology, diverse in opinion, diverse in age, diverse in major, diverse in all of that. And that is how we get a collective momentum going. That's how we can get a collective consensus on things. And so I think that it's going to be important to understand that the energy and the party is not always going to happen, especially during an uncomfortable and challenging conversation. I think that we can make the assessment in this country that we're not ready to party yet. We have a lot that we still need to do to expose the things that are oppressing the people, whether it's oppressive to the conservative or whether it's oppressive to the liberal, because we're hearing those talks right now. We're hearing discrimination being accused from both sides in different ways. And so, in order for us to be truly inclusive, right, and to be truly able to get to the issue, the root of the issue, and find the solution, we got to show up. And we got to show up when there's not a party. Now, we'll feed you. You can eat. You can get some food, but you might not feel good. It might not feel good, And so I think that everyone needs to be committed to that in order for us to be able to party together at the end of all of this. So thank you so much, everyone, for responding to that question. Oh, let me plug the Spirit of Service Scholars seminars that are happening this spring. That is a place that's issue-based advocacy, that is partisan inclusive, and that is where people can really, truly dialogue from all sides of the spectrum, whether you're in the middle as an independent, a true independent, or maybe you just don't want to decide which party you're going to be in. But Spirit of Service Scholars seminars are happening. They're coming up quick. Pay attention on Sun Devil Sync. Hopefully Ian's going to get us a Instagram page going as well so that we can get more exposure on social media. But there are 4 offerings that the Spirit of Service Scholars will be bringing to the ASU community this spring. Anyone else want to lend to that question before we move on to the next one? All right. And those of you out there in the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them. All right. So we have a question from another audience member, and it says, in these growing times of having this new president and him and the politics putting so many new orders and laws in place so quickly, I feel overwhelmed by the amount of information or misinformation from news or social media accounts. How do you shuffle through this information to find the correct information, as well as try to inform others that may be just taking this information at face value? So it looks like Zion wants to answer that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I forget the exact term, but at the Cronkite School, one thing, obviously, us being a journalism school, we're all about information. And one thing that they teach us coming into the school initially is something called, it's essentially this practice of what's called cross-reading, where essentially, whereas before, they were encouraging people to like read in depth of the things they're reading, that's still recommended. But one thing one approach they've now adopted in terms of teaching us is what's called cross-reading, which is instead of just looking heavily into one source, look across multiple sources, right? Because in this age of misinformation, there's clearly a lot of things out there, but obviously there's certain sources that you can go to where the facts are going to add up. And in order to like ensure and for your comfortability, things of that nature, one thing that you can kind of do to make sure that the information you're getting is correct is just kind of cross-checking and fact-checking, right? If you see something on like Instagram, right, don't just take that for face value, actually take the time to go into Google, check multiple sources, and that way you're ensuring that the information you're receiving is accurate. Obviously misinformation is kind of hard to spot out all the time, but that's one technique I've adopted personally myself as well. That's kind of allowed, kind of helped me in that. It's kind of just, drawing from multiple places. So that way you're kind of getting a full kind of scope of what's going on instead of just overly relying on one source. That's actually a very dangerous practice. Please don't do that. And yeah, Evan, go ahead and add on.
That's awesome. I love the idea of cross reading. I was gonna mention about how you can't really avoid bias, and so cast a large net, and kind of just infer from there what seems reasonable. It's almost sometimes better to see a website. If you go to a website that's known to be conservative or known to be liberal, you have an expectation of the bias that's in there, so you know where they might be, over exaggerating in some places, or if they're using insults and describing a person, you're like, okay, so like let's take a step back from this. I think that's really important. Oh shoot, I was gonna say something else, but I kind of forgot. So if anyone else wants to step in.
That happens to me a lot too, Evan. You get going and you're like, wait, I had another place I was trying to go to. Yeah, it's the passion. It's the passion. Does anyone else want to lend to this question about where, how to fact check and not take things at face value? Ian?
Yeah, no, I see a lot of value in reading the news, like right wing and left wing news from both sides. Even though I am not a conservative, I do read quite a bit of conservative news just to kind of see how they frame the issue. It's also a lot about framing too. I would, before you just consume the news at face value, just kind of think a little bit about how they're framing this issue or not. You know, I mean, some of the stuff that was coming out of the LA fires, you'd have just a straight reading of how this brush fire started, but then you might have seen on the conservative side, they started bringing in diversity, equity, and inclusion policies or discussion into the fire chief, stuff like that. And then there was actually, it might have, and that like on the surface might have obscured another component of that story, like the defunding of the fire budget in LA. So there's just so many different moving parts of every news and current event story. You just kind of have to keep a very broad and open mind to all of those different things and never just take something at face value, especially with the internet, especially with Twitter. Twitter is kind of like they give you an idea of what to look for. Don't just stop there, follow those links all the way through.
I'll just share just a little bit. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Go ahead, Evan.
Okay, I appreciate that. I was going to mention that this polarized news isn't really anything new to our nation. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a lot of publications of newspapers out there, and a lot of them were very, very biased and were prone to the same kind of lying, falsifying news, purposely misleading people. It's not anything new. And so I would say if you really feel lost in this environment, I would look to the past a little bit. I would look towards people, books or articles that go over previous times in our history and show where that bias really leans in. The more you know about the past, the more you can apply it to today, and you can be like, okay, like this gimmick's been going on since the 1800s, like people lie in this way constantly. And so, yeah, yellow journalism. Yeah. I think it's important. Look back on how it used to be. It really hasn't changed that much. Just the mode of getting information has.
That was just something I was going to pinpoint on, and also the people that are writing these things. Those are the most important things you should also take account in for. Just an example, like people who are writing history books and stuff. Like what went on from like Evan was saying, all of that up till today, just fact checking. It's easy and it's probably a little bit more convenient to you just to like search something, watch a video, or look up something really quick and then stick to that. So it's more than that. I think that it's really, and that's something I'll be honest, I used to do until I learned, along the way that's not the right not the right way to do it. So not going to social media for news updates, not listening to the people that you follow, and the celebrities and stuff that you follow, and taking their stance on, especially when it comes to politics, because they're in a different area than you, they grew up different than you, they have different views than you. So that's one thing that I've noticed, that my journey into being educated and aware in these areas, those were my faults, and then where I'm at now.
I would love to go.
I think you're muted. I think you accidentally muted yourself over there.
Oops, thank you.
Okay.
I was saying I don't mean to hog the time, but but I think an important thing to do is kind of goes back to the like mental health thing, is choosing what you care about. And that if you decide that a story is important to you, let it sit for a little bit. You don't need to have a reaction. You don't need to read everything about it as it's happening. You don't need that breaking news. I feel like the more time a situation has to sit, the easier it is to find reliable and articulate analysis of the event. When you're getting the breaking news out of Twitter and whatnot, that's when all the opinions are flying and the emotions are at their highest, and when people really start kind of exaggerating and lying a little bit. And so I think the best thing you can do is, if something really does matter to you, take the time to let it breathe and do some background research if you can, and try not to take it all at face value. Yeah.
Wow, that was wonderful contributions to that question. I think I want to add something as well. I think I will just say, when we're thinking about the history and the historical factors of the information, and when you're looking back to kind of connect what's happening today, we do need to look to the past. There's something we think about, or we talk about in African culture, is called Sankofa, right? Where we remember our ancestors while we center the present and we think towards what's the future, right? What's to come. And that's really, really important. And so we're in a time where the history books might not be the most accurate. And so storytelling is so important. And so if you can find indigenous storytellers, indigenous to whatever land or culture that they're indigenous to, I think that you're going to get a lot of history from those spaces, and a lot of true preserved history from their actual lived experiences. So, folklore is really, really important for people, but storytelling is extremely important, and learning history at the feet of the elders is really going to help us to stay grounded in the truth and not fall victim to the misinformation that is out there. So, pay attention to that type of information that is on social media. You are going to find some really treasured indigenous storytellers on social media. YouTube is probably better for that, because they're not out there on the TikTok and stuff like that. But because most of you are digital nomads and you grew up with the digital age, I think critical thinking and critical analysis is really going to keep you centered in the truth going forward, and to make sure that when you have heavy emotions about something, that you don't respond, or you don't. Sometimes we lie to ourselves. And so you want to make sure that you're in the best headspace before you actually make a firm decision about something that you're intaking. So storytelling is really, really important. So if you have family members that have lived through things, like, get their stories, capture those stories for them, so that they're there, because who knows what's going to happen to history books and to what's going to happen in this country about our history. So, anyone else have any thoughts to add to this question? Francis?
I had put in the chat for the person who had asked the question of the all sides media bias chart. I don't know if y'all have heard of it, but it basically just gives you a breakdown of the left-leaning, centrist, and right-leaning media outlets, and basically just lets you know, like, okay, like these are the outlets that are very left-leaning, these are the outlets that are very right-leaning. I can drop that in the chat for everyone to see. And honestly, it's something that is so useful that I've been using since undergrad. And so if you want to be fact checking, that's a great way to see where bias lies in journalist views. So, and honestly, just following independent journalists is one of my favorite things. Like Erin Reed is one that I follow to get my transgender news from because she goes like straight from the legislature. She'll go straight from the Supreme Court, and it just making sure that you're getting the news straight from a source that you trust is really important.
Yeah, so for those of you who are watching the replay on YouTube, that website is allsides.com/media bias. And so you'll want to look up the media bias chart on there. That's what Francis was talking about. All right, we're rounding up here towards the end of this discussion now. So Francis, do you want to facilitate the final thoughts from our panelists?
Yeah, let's get it going. All right, so would anyone like to start, or would you like me to pick on you? All right, Ian, go ahead.
Oh, wow, I got picked on. So my final thoughts for today is that, we are uncertain about what the next 4 years lie ahead with the second Donald Trump administration. But whatever happens, I do know one thing. I do know that young people and working class people will be the future, will be the torchbearers for whatever comes next. And it's going to come through issue-based advocacy. It's going to come from a source that's outside of the two major parties. I think, if anything, 2024 taught us that Americans have an all-time low confidence in either the Democrats or the Republicans. And it's going to be producing a inward effect where people are going to start maybe looking more towards their immediate surroundings, their immediate community issues, rather than national politics, at least until the midterms. So I'm hoping that, we're going to get real solutions in the next 4 years and not just more, hot air from both parties.
Thank you, Ian. Evan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think in general, I agree with Ian that this time is going to be a time period where people realize that they can't really just sit back and let them take care of it. I think a lot of groups that haven't had their voices heard are realizing like there really isn't anyone on our side. You really have to fight for yourself. And so I feel like that's something that's been slowly evolving, and I think that leads to people losing interest in the Democratic and Republican Party or switching sides for an election. I think this is going to be a good time for people to realize, hey, we got to take stuff into our own hands, and I think local politics is gonna see some revitalization.
Thank you, Evan. Zion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, given this new administration, this next 4 years is going to be a long time, long time. But I think some words of encouragement I can offer is, just make sure that you're okay mentally. I know this period is going to be tough for a lot of people. And I think one of the most important things we have to make sure is that we're taking care of ourselves, but also just to have empathy and compassion for others, because, it's definitely not going to be easy. Everyone has their own fights that they're dealing with in terms of what's going on. So I'd say just always have that space to be compassionate with people and kind of care about where they're coming from and, allow them to feel how they feel. But nevertheless, I would say don't get discouraged. I think it's easy to feel a lot of discouragement right now, given what's played out the last week or so. But I would say don't get discouraged. I think just make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And, I think like Ian touched on it, there's always some type of good that's going to prevail. So just stay hopeful is the best thing I could say as well.
Thank you, Zion. All right, Katie?
I know a lot of us have expressed some of our, concerns for the next couple of years and what this interim period looks like, but personally, I have a lot of hope and I'm really excited for what's to come, especially with the amazing young people that are leading the way. I think our generation, my generation, is going to drive change, is going to be outspoken, is going to, move us forward. And we're seeing increased turnout year after year after year. And so I know especially this group that's here right now is going to continue that. And so I'm personally hopeful and excited for the time to come.
Thank you, Katie and Devana.
Yeah, I think that just like everyone said, the next 4 years is going to be a big eye opener for everyone who has not been actively engaged or aware or educated around like the whole political situations we're going on. And I think this year that would be transitioning into being more engaged, being more involved, asking more questions, and most importantly, like showing up into these spaces and letting people know that um, their lack thereof sometimes can have a lasting effect into not only our lives presently, but if they have children, if they have families, the younger generations. Um, so starting to show up today, starting to speak up today, and advocate for other people as well. Just as a Navajo woman, we have many roles. We kind of are we're very compassionate, very empathetic, and just looking out for everyone. And that's kind of how I grew up to be. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of, set aside like picking and choosing my battles. That's where I struggle with, and that's okay. And as long as I know that there are people out there giving me their words of advice like you guys are today, I never really thought of that. I didn't think that's also how people thought. So just being here and kind of my wraparound around this panel, I'm just very fortunate to be in this space, to hold space in these areas as a Native American and as a Navajo woman. Um, it is opening up. Given like my ideas are just like flooding right now. Like, how can I do this for myself? How can I do this for my family? And how can I do this for the Native American communities that I do work in? Because all of the decision making when it comes to political conversations do trickle down to each and every one of those categories in my life. So I think that like Katie said, I do have a lot of hope now. Like, we're in this together. We're all facing the same thing together. And so thank you guys for your time and inviting me here.
Thank you all so, so much. I know that the next 4 years is going to be difficult. And I also know that we are going to continue to show up for each other. We're going to show up for our communities. We're going to make sure that there is going to be hope no matter what. And we're not going to we're not going to bend down to rules that have not actually been established yet. Like with these executive orders, like just for my opinion, like they're going to go to court because they may not be constitutional. So let's just make sure that we're not already kneeling when we should be standing.
Wow. I'm so proud. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your contributions to this discussion. This is the time where we're going to take our screenshot. So I'm going to ask Sophia. Sophia is my assistant here in the Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service, who has been learning the ropes of the webinar behind the scenes to have a bigger role going forward for the rest of the semester. So everyone ready? We're going to do a screenshot. Put your smiley face on. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okie dokie. All right, and so one last thing as well. We have another event in the Pastor Center that is happening on Monday. So Monday, we will be curating a conversation with the ACLU of Arizona to discuss understanding free speech on college campuses and in campus adjacent places near campus. So let me share my screen just so that everyone can see the flyer. So this is the flyer for our event on Monday. It is a virtual webinar that is happening over the lunch hour. We're scheduled from 12 to 1 p.m., but it could go a little bit longer just depending on the the content, the questions, and how engaged the audience is going to be. So again, we are hosting this nonpartisan discussion about understanding free speech on college campuses, and we all are welcome to ask questions, to be there to hear from one of the ACLU of Arizona's community organizers, as well as one of their lawyers here in Arizona. So we just wanted to plug that real quick. Let me stop sharing my screen. All right, and let me go ahead and ask the executive director to give some closing remarks, and then I will say my closing remarks and we will head out.
Thanks, Tiffany, and I'll just echo my appreciation. This was a needed, important, timely conversation. I think a hopeful conversation. And I'm just thinking back to paraphrase an old saying, sometimes the best thing you can have is a good adversary. Thinking back to another, frankly, scary, dark time in our history when we had a Senate president and a governor that were passing a lot of legislation that was frankly quite hostile and terrifying to immigrants in Arizona. And young Latino activists organized to pass a recall petition and were able to get the Senate president recalled from office. At the time that they were campaigning, most of us, I think, in the political world thought they didn't have a chance. And I kind of felt bad for them. I was anticipating that they'd be crushed by their failure. But to many of our surprise, they were wildly successful. And it was the first time in the US that a state Senate president had been recalled by a vote of the voters of the state. That experience ignited and inspired a whole generation of young Latino activists, and the repercussions of that continue today. So afterwards, a member of the legislature at the time, Representative John Laredo, gave a speech, and he said, we ought to thank Senate President Russell Pierce. And everyone's like, what is he talking about? He said, because of what he did, he woke up a whole generation of young people that are not going to sit down anymore and that have realized their potential and their power. So I feel we may be in that moment now, whatever side you're on, left, right, and center. Young people are deeply concerned about their communities and are passionate and determined to get involved and make change. I think we're going to see unexpected things come from this generation of young activists. And I can't wait to see where we go from here. But thank you all for the work that you're doing now and will continue to do. Let's all just be there for each other, take care of ourselves, and take care of each other as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alberto, for those final thoughts. For me, I just want to say, I want to encourage us all to understand that this is the time to hold folks accountable, right? To hold folks accountable for what they say they're going to do, and to hold folks accountable to the preservation of the truth, right? And so those of us who have access to higher education, we have a privilege. We're privileged to have this information, to have access to so much truth at our fingertips. But we have community members and we have people in the world who don't have that same privilege. And so I think for those of us who do have letters behind our name, who are pursuing higher education, who are increasing our realm of understanding, that we also have, I don't think requirement is the word, but maybe it's obligation, right? We have an obligation to share that information with folks who may not have that same access. And so that's what I'm asking for us to do, for all of you here in the panel, for all of you watching, is to get to the truth, to understand the truth. If something doesn't feel right to you, research it a little bit more to get the understanding of the truth so that you can hold folks accountable to the preservation of history here in this country. I think that's going to be very important over the next few years to remind folks of the way things actually happened so that we can move forward in a way that heals the past and brings hope for the future. So I'm not discouraged. I too am hopeful. I think that we have a lot to look forward to. We have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of centering of ourselves. So the one big thing that's going to be most important for us is to take care of ourselves mentally, physically, spiritually, in any way that we need to make sure that we're good for ourselves, like Zion said, his mom shared, we're no good for anyone else if we're not good for ourselves. And so those of us in the civic engagement space, we hold a lot of people on our backs. We hold a lot of communities in our hands, and we need to make sure that we're good for them too. So those are my final words to you. Stay present, stay focused, and stay in the truth. Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you.